Welcome back to the Locker Room podcast number 60. I'm pleased to say I've got Stevie Poacher and Daniel St. Ledger here today. Lads, that was a huge weekend of sport there. Stevie, you'll obviously be a happy man there, seeing Liverpool getting beat there at the weekend. Daniel, I'm not quite sure who you support. I think you're a Liverpool man, are you?
I'd like to see them doing well, but I'd be relatively neutral now. I won't stay at home supporting just for fear of what I get back. But a little bit upset for them at the weekend.
But Stevie, a bad week for you. Down, get beat, and obviously Liverpool. You're not a Liverpool fan, are you?
No, Joe. No, definitely not. Having spent 4 years in Manchester, a season ticket holder now, just in the step for them. So had good old days, Joe. Good old days, but they're few and far between now. No, listen, down beat as well. Long road back. I don't think we've enough time in the show to start talking about down tonight.
No, I think we'll give them about 20 seconds. Lads, we'll talk about coming up on the show. We'll talk about the Ulster final to begin with. Then we'll talk a wee bit about Galway, and then obviously Dublin and Kerry, they're winning as well. Hard to tell what's happening there. Then we'll see who you might fancy for the back door in the All-Ireland, and then we'll finish up with a Tailteann Cup roundup. But before we get into that, a huge thanks to our sponsors, Ripped, for supporting the podcast. Ripped's online platform provides coaches with everything they need to optimize athlete performance. Head over to ripped.app for more information. Okay, Stevie, we'll start with you, and we'll start with the big one, the Ulster final. 30,000 fans at Clonus, one of the biggest days, obviously, in the GAA calendar. A real arm wrestle of a game, a real game of chess in many ways. What were your thoughts on the game?
Well, look, Joe, it's pretty straightforward. The game panned out the exact way I thought it would have panned out. Only I probably predicted a narrow Donegal victory. And it was looking like that, particularly late in the game, Joe, when Donegal went 2 points up. I was sort of mesmerised by the tempo at which they played the next 8 to 10 minutes. I think there was a statistic emerged of, for the next 10 minutes or something, they never had a single shot, and even Joe, the very last play of the game, they worked the set piece kick out, the sort of the bunch and break type kick out. It was very clear what they were doing. Derry sort of pressed it a little bit. There was still 40 seconds left in the clock, and they still didn't, Joe, try and orchestrate a scoring opportunity, in normal time, which I found just absolutely astonishing because, to work a free shot right at the end, obviously, Herson was going to blow the whistle, regardless of whether the shot dropped short or dropped wide or went over, so I think they'll look back and they'll probably be kicking themselves, Donegal, from that perspective, Joe, that they had opportunities, at 2 points up in such an arm wrestle. The way Derry started the game, I actually was so surprised that Donegal got back in it, and it was a degree of fortune, Joe. The goal was a real sort of degree of fortune. It wasn't a really well worked goal like the Derry backdoor cut, that they've been working on for such a long period of time now. But listen, it's gonna. I was chatting to Daniel earlier about this, and I'll let him have his own say on it. But there's always a hysteria, Joe, whenever there's a game like Kerry and Donegal. There's calls for rule changes. There's mass hysteria. You get the sound bites from the dinosaurs like Spillane and O'Rourke and stuff like that. Who are just looking sensationalism and looking at a throwaway comment. But if you delve into it, you look at coaches like Mickey Hart and Canavan and Marty Clark, and the analysis from BBC One, for example, absolutely top class. And you look at the matchups, Joe, a lot of people predicted Brenny Rodgers to go on to Michael Murphy, but a lot of people didn't predict Brenny Rodgers outscoring Michael Murphy, going the other way and driving forward and really putting Michael on the back foot. Chrissy McKay gave another exhibition of man marking defence. Like, Joe, the discipline that takes to mark a man like McBurdy and not give him a sniff, it's phenomenal discipline, like ridiculous discipline. But I think discipline's the key word. Like, for Derry to execute that plan and not deviate away from that plan, Joe, and to stay really, really disciplined, like, that takes a serious high degree of coaching and conditioning, Joe. I don't think that people appreciate how difficult it is to nail that type of performance. And I think we'll have to take a step back, Joe, as well, look at where Derry have come from. 3 years ago, Derry were Division 4. Daniel, you'll probably remember playing them actually up in Mayo Bridge in a challenge match in 2019, 3 years ago. Similar group of players, you know, and Carlo beat them that day in a challenge match in the depths of the winter. But like Joe, I'll be honest with you here now, like where that group has come from, you know, 3 or 4 years ago to where they are now, having beaten the All-Ireland champions, having beaten last year's Ulster finalists, Monaghan, and having beaten the favourites to win Ulster this year, Donegal, like 3 Division 1 teams is a phenomenal achievement, like, and something that really, really, it should be embraced and really respected rather than fun being poked at it, Joe, you know, from the quality of the game. So for me, I thought the game sort of took a shape that I completely predicted it would. It was going to be a game of cat and mouse. Nobody was going to give any space in behind. Nobody was going to start pressing and leaving themselves vulnerable to counter-attack. It was a game of chess. It was a very tactical warfare, as you would call it, typical Ulster battle. And listen, Derry are through, Joe, and I'll tell you this now, Derry will be hard to beat because they are super organised. And when you've got a group, Joe, and this is something that I've always said to teams I've been working with in the past, and you know, if you have a plan, Joe, right? Your plan might not necessarily be the best plan in the world, right? It mightn't be the sexiest game plan, but if you have 100% buy-in to that plan from everyone in that group, a 100% buy-in, and you have a group down the road who have a much more sexier plan, much more innovation in their plan, but only 75-80% of them are buying in. The group that are all buying in will win 99 times out of 100, Joe. And that's what Derry have at the present moment in time. They've got a group of players who believe in the system, they believe in Gallagher, and they're following it to the letter of the law. And I completely respect what they're doing. And I'm delighted to see a new face on the Anglo-Celt Cup.
Yeah, truly remarkable achievement there, Daniel, from Derry. It was a close game in the end. You know, there wasn't too much between these teams, went to extra time. But what in your view, how did Derry get over the line here? What was the difference?
Well, the first thing is I'm not discussing any thoughts I had on a game in future ahead of our podcast with Poacher anymore because I'll have nothing left to say. But anyway, I'll try to come up with something. But he's after robbing half mine. But either way, but I suppose I'll try to stick to just the game itself because I think when you talk about analysing games, we're not analysing anything else really other than that. And to get into the commentary of the whole thing, I think would be unfair to Derry, firstly, because I think there's an element of that has been lost in what they've done, beating Division 1 teams and coming from Division 4 up to the ranks. And I saw Chris McKeag saying today he's had the privilege of playing in all 4 divisions, you know, and that's an unusual thing in today's world. But look, the margins were fine. They're really, really fine. And I think people are kind of getting lost a little bit in the fact that there was a huge fear factor from both sides to get over the line here. And from Donegal's point of view, like Rory Gallagher definitely was an element for them. And you could sense that they just didn't want to feed into his plan. It's almost they knew too well what he wanted. And I was thinking about Michael Murphy, a lot of talk about him not being inside. And I was just imagining any kind of long ball would almost be that they turned over, would almost be worth a point to Derry because that would be the target man. That would be the talisman. You could even see with the freeze, with the amount of pressure they put on Michael Murphy's freeze, they had 4 and 5 men making a wall almost. And they were giving him, like, you're not allowed to shout at a free taker anymore, but the fans did a fair share of it. And you could see them trying to put them off. And there's no doubt little things like that were planned, you know. And I think Donegal nearly, they overthought it to a certain degree because they were saying to themselves, well, we're not going to give Rory Gallagher what he wants. He wants Murphy in the edge of the square and he wants turnovers. Brendan Rodgers can compete with him. We'll swarm him. We'll get big turnovers. You get oxygen from it. We'll hit them on the break. So I think there's an element of Donegal nearly overthought that factor of a little bit. Derry stuck to what they've been doing. And like, you know, it's when you go to watch the game, like you don't go to a James Bond film and all of a sudden be shocked when you see Spider-Man. Like this was never going to be anything but what it was. It was 2 counter-attacking teams. And like, I'm kind of, there's a funny narrative if you're either totally for it or totally against it. There seems to be very little in the middle. Like, and I'd admit to myself, there was times in the game where I was scrolling through Twitter because there wasn't much happening. But then in the moments of excitement, like you have to appreciate some of the scores, how hard scores were to come by. Like to be able to work scenarios where you were able to get a shot in with that level of confinement, what was incredible. Like, but I'm definitely in the middle somewhere. But I thought Derry showed a little bit more bite about them, and they probably, and Stevie would talk to us a lot about this in Carlow, they controlled the tempo, I thought, really well. I thought they were more than happy to hold on to the ball for long periods, to sit in and take their breath, because I think they finished a lot stronger in extra time, and I don't think that's a coincidence either. And especially when they attacked, they had far more vigor, let's say, when they did go for, I think Mickey Hart used the phrase cutting a good bit at half time. When they cut and when they worked overloads down the flanks, they really went after them. And I think the goal is a perfect example of that, where they worked an overload down the left-hand side, lovely little backdoor cut, and a really, really good finish. So I think Derry showed a little bit more, energy is not the right word, but a little bit more commitment to actually attacking than Donegal did. And I think Donegal, they were a disappointment. I'd say I thought they looked very lethargic. I thought they never really wanted to. It never really looked like, even when they had scenarios where they had a 2-on-3 or a 3-on-1 or something like that, out the field, it never really went after it that much. And I think probably that little bit of bravery held Derry in good stead in the end. But like, as I said, the margins are so small. If Donegal won that by a point, that's job done for Declan Bonner's point of view, because that was a horribly tricky game. And Tyrone and Monaghan showed, if you go and try and spray ball around against Derry, they will catch you and they will pick you off, and they are incredibly organised. And I think the most important point Steve alluded to there, to have the discipline to stick to that game plan, to stick to what they were doing, even though they probably knew they were going to be getting a little bit of flack from the general public, let's say, even though at times it wasn't amazing to watch. To be able to stick to that religiously in a real cauldron, I think took unbelievable discipline. And I know myself from the coaching side of it and from a player's point of view, to have that level of discipline, just to not be getting sucked into turnovers, I think it's incredibly hard to do. And people might say, well, sure, they're only keeping it out in the middle of the field, but they still scored, what was it, 116, I think. There were times when they picked their moments to go, they really went. And I think that was probably the key difference between the two.
Joe, the other thing to consider as well is, I think, for all the criticism that the game has received, if we historically go back over the last 10 Ulster finals, for example, there's been a kick of the ball in every one of them. They've been really intriguing tactical battles, that have kept people, on the edge of their seats right to the end of the game. And let's be honest, Joe, when two heavyweights collide, whether it's in any sport, whether it's in rugby, whether it's in soccer, take the Champions League final on Saturday night, everyone's expecting this classic game. It was a dour affair. The final the year before was a dour affair as well. The game that Liverpool had against Spurs was a dour affair. The cup finals this year, both 0-0s. When two big teams meet in a final, Daniel hit the nail on the head there when he said fear. No one wants to lose the game. That's the very first thing. People are nearly afraid to lose the game. And that's why you have, sometimes games that are very attritional, and listen, for me, and I suppose we'll chat about the other provincials in smaller detail, but for me, do I want Sunday or do I want Saturday? Sunday every day of the week, because Saturday was embarrassing. It was pathetic,
It's probably important to note as well, as that sort of a game probably won't happen again all year. We won't see that again all year, as far as I'm concerned. We mightn't see it for another 3 years. Clonus, no doubt, is a tight cauldron. Ulster final is different to even an All-Ireland quarterfinal or to a big qualifier game. There's a different kind of pressure around it. The reaction to it is just incredible. And even I know I said I wouldn't get into the outside stuff, but it's kind of irritated me, so I may as well go after it. But calling for rule changes in the middle of a game from a commentator who, is just a commentator, I thought was absolutely ridiculous. Imagine you go into the Masters next week and you see one under winning or a mass or a. Or we're talking a major sometime in the coming weeks, and you see one under winning a major. People aren't calling for rule changes that the tees must be brought further up. Do you know what I mean? It's ridiculous sort of stuff, and it's frustrating because it takes away from the whole thing. And you'd love people just to take a step back a little bit and say, all right, lads, it's one bad game that maybe wasn't the most enjoyable to watch, but who cares? Let's get on with the thing. We've got All-Ireland quarterfinals and qualifiers coming up,
And Joe, the other thing to consider, Joe, as well, is those people that make the noises are completely devolved from Ulster football. They don't understand what an Anglo-Celt Cup means. You seen James McCarthy celebrating on Saturday. It was like, put it away, away you go. Wasn't even a smile.
Okay, Daniel, what we'll do is we'll actually, just before we move on to the Connacht final, just about Derry there and their sort of tactical approach and the Derry players, do you think that Derry now have the players to go on and win in All Ireland to compete against the likes of Dublin and Kerry?
No, probably not yet. No, I don't think so. I like they will definitely be competitive. No doubt about that. I initially when they bet Tyrone the first day, I was kind of wondering will they be able to find that emotional energy again? And in fairness, they did, and they've kind of proved that it's a little bit more than that now. There is more strings. There are more strings to their bow, but I still think if Derry got to a semi-final, that would be an unbelievable year for them. Like, but I think they're probably missing that overall firepower when it comes to Croke Park, and Croke Park is a different animal to most grounds. And I know we always say it here, but it's very hard for counter-attacking teams in Croke Park, and probably not. But like, who knows at this stage? I said that before, and look what they're after showing. But at the end of the day, they still scraped over the line in extra time against a very flat Donegal team. So that context is probably necessary, without taking away from an unbelievable achievement that they have gotten their Anglo-Celt. But the probably the release, I'd say, because there's no doubt about it that the Ulster final was their target at the start of the year. Probably the release of energy, the release of emotion after that. It might be very hard to get back up to that pitch again. We'll see, but I'd be still a little bit unsure.
Yeah, and we're also a bit unsure of Dublin's progress because they haven't really, come against a top team as of yet. Stevie, let's move on to the Connacht final. Galway with an impressive victory over Roscommon. Now, a lot of people were kind of tipping Roscommon with their quality forwards and thought they might have come through there against Galway, but Galway showed their class in the end. Shane Walsh's goal was excellent. Stevie, what did you think of that Galway performance?
Look, obviously, Joe, like the heart would have wanted Roscommon to win, but the head was saying Galway before the game. I had no doubt that Galway were going to win the game because, look, Roscommon played Galway in the National League, Joe. Galway played a second string team in the last game. It was a facile victory for Roscommon. I was at the league final. Galway played a double sweeper, but they played two lads who were never going to be sweeper in the championship against Mayo. They also played the second choice goalkeeper against Roscommon as well. They held Shane Walsh back till the last 10 minutes. So Galway were sort of playing the game a wee bit in the league final, Joe. Roscommon were full out, showed their full hand. At this stage, both teams know each other very well, but it was astonishing, Joe, probably the lack of matchup on the key men. Like, for example, Derry are on a possible collision course for Galway in an All-Ireland semi-final if both of them win their quarterfinals. Like, Derry would absolutely eat Shane Walsh alive. Chrissy McCaig would eat him for breakfast. There's no question about it. He would not get a sniff off McCaig. And he was just given the absolute run of Salt Hill on Sunday. It was astonishing, and a bit disappointed actually to see it because he was ultimately, Joe, the difference between the two sides, and when you give a player of Shane Walsh's caliber a free role like that, there's only one way the game's going to end. Shane Walsh is an exceptional footballer, but you've got to match up on him. You've got to have someone on him who is just going to dog it out of him for 70 minutes. And that's the greatest respect you can show someone like Walsh because, when you're a top player, you get targeted, you get your Chrissy McCaig put on you or your Brendan Rodgers, whoever it happens to be, the opposition's best player and our best man marker. And for me on Sunday past, I thought Roscommon were very, very naive in their approach defensively. And look, it cost them in the end, Joe, as well. But I do feel Galway have vulnerabilities. I don't rate the Galway kick out at all. They have no kick out strategy whatsoever, Joe. They got away with one right through the Comer, but it was actually a mishit. The Sunday game analysed on Sunday night, but it was actually a mishit from the keeper. They have two kickouts, Joe. It's either a short kick out, which is a high risk one, okay, if an opposition push up on you, and then they have the box kick out to the sideline that sort of Paddy Talley brought in a few years ago when he was in with Kevin Walsh. It's overload a load of big bodies on the sideline, and the strategy and the idea behind that kick out, Joe, is that that's a very low risk kick out. So if you lose that kick out on the sideline, there's no risk to you conceding a score. And a lot of the statistics from Paddy were based off the fact that kick out you don't concede scores from. But your kick out, Joe, should be a platform to launch attacks from. And that's, for me, when you get to the business end of the season, those are the small little margins that are going to make the difference between you winning and losing big games. And for me, Galway, you cannot win in All-Ireland or get to an All-Ireland final with no kick-out strategy. And at the present moment in time, Galway are bereft of one. I also feel as well what Daniel says as well, they're a bit of counter-attacking team in Croke Park. I think in Croke Park as well, they will get a wee bit found out because they do have one way of playing and one way only, and that is a counter-attack game where they rely on the pace of Walsh and Comer and, you know, Flannery and these boys. And, you know, they play a double sweeper. Paul Conroy's an absolute Rolls Royce of a footballer. So if you were going to play Galway in an All-Ireland quarter-final or semi-final, Joe, you shut Conroy down and you shut Shane Walsh down, and you probably just shut Galway down full stop, you know. So for me, good win for Galway. Wasn't surprised, but I think that's as far as Galway's going, Joe, to be honest with you.
Daniel, do you agree with Stevie's assessment on that game?
Yeah, that game in general, Joe, it actually, oddly, I was probably looking forward to that more so than most over the weekend, and that left me feeling probably flattest after the lot, you know, and that probably sounds funny to say it, but I really expected kind of a championship sort of edge to it, and it just never materialized. I had a feeling of kind of I won't say a pre-season game, but like a friendly match before championship. You know, there was, like Stevie mentioned, the matchups from Roscommon's point of view. Like there was nothing there at all. There was no edge. There was no bit of bite. And Colin O'Rourke before the game was effusive and about Roscommon's new attacking style, and they were back to what they were good at. And I'm just wondering if that's what they're good at. Well, Christ above, like, what are they bad at? Because I just couldn't for the life of me understand, as Stevie was saying, how you don't pin Comer, how you don't pin Shane Walsh, how you don't pin Conroy. No matchups. And I was looking at Galway, in fairness to them, and they have their flaws as well, but I was looking at Galway and Kieran Malloy on Donny Smith, and everywhere he went, he did a bit of a Chrissy McCaig job. Everywhere he went, he was in his face, he was slapping at him, he was narky, he brought a bit of edge, you know, he brought a bit of proper championship mentality, like, and I'm just wondering, like, and actually that significantly reduced Donny's kind of Miranda Smith's input in the game, and you're just wondering what the thought process was there for Roscommon. Like, they never really looked like they had the bit of gumption to go and actually try and win it, and they thought they might do it with nice flowing football. But in fairness to Galway, they are playing a kind of a counter-attacking style, as Stevie said. It's not a million miles away from what Derry are doing, but it's probably not as organised. I thought Sean Kavanagh did a piece beforehand about how they defended and how they transitioned, and it was fairly on the money. It's numbers back to the top of the deep, but as regards the organisation around it, probably isn't as far down the road as Derry. But what they do have is phenomenal individuals, and phenomenal individuals will get you a good amount of the way, but it's probably that overall structure that is going to be needed to break into that semi-final final place. So I still don't know about Galway. Like, you're conceding 2-16 to Roscommon, like, and Roscommon were extremely poor. That would concern me significantly. I know the goals kind of came in the dying moments, but a really clinical team will finish that out and won't even give those opportunities. So definitely a few bits to work on from Galway. They'll probably be delighted to get over the line. Shane Walsh seemed very happy afterwards, you know, and it was the first Connacht title in Salt Hill in a good while. So look, they just probably wanted to get the win, but definitely, again, going down the road, there will be issues for them. And then Roscommon going forward, like, they just need to get a bit of bite back. I was just astonished at how timid they were. Was the best word for them.
And there was a point there, I think, Roscommon maybe should have had a penalty. There was a foot block. I think Dermot Murder got a goal at the end, but obviously Roscommon, they weren't in the game. They didn't look like winning it. How far, Stevie, do you think Roscommon can do if can they bounce back from that and go through the back doors? Do you have any hope for them? Stevie, that's you now, Stevie. Yeah.
They're a great bunch of lads, Joe, and, you know, I'd love to see Roscommon, you know, obviously progressing, like, because they've got some brilliant footballers, but they haven't really performed either, Joe, and Croke Park. You know, that's a big stumbling block for them in a big game. Now, the league final, you could probably argue it was still the Division 2 final. They've won Division 2 before. You know, they haven't had a big win in Croke Park, Joe, and I know that was the sort of the monkey on the backs. You know, when I was down last year, that was the big target to try and get the Croker for a semi-final. You know, that's the glass ceiling for us coming, you know, get to that semi-final. And it's going to be difficult unless they get a home draw, Joe, in Dr. Hay Park, you know, against someone in the back door. And listen, there is games there, Joe, that are winnable. You know, there is games in the back door that you know, teams will be looking for. But if they were to get a Mayo or a Monaghan or a Tyrone or an Armagh, you know, it could be the end of the road, Joe, because you just come up against teams who are just better organised defensively. And listen, Joe, people can beat the stick about attacking football and this and that and that. But the bottom line is, Joe, like, you know, when you've got a strong defensive structure and a strong defensive base, that's the foundation for any victory moving forward. And you look at the teams that are left now, Kerry, Paddy Tally in there now, real strong defensive structure. Dublin have a real strong defensive structure back in place. Kerry, the Ulster Captains, real strong defensive structure. And Galway, albeit Galway's defensive structure, as Daniel rightly pointed out, is more a safety in numbers. It's not as organised as the rest, but they're getting there, you know, and they realise to get to the next level, you need that defensive structure, you know, and unfortunately Roscommon don't have that. And, you know, the likes of David Murray and Stacky and these boys, you know, it's just when you've got space in front of you, defenders hate two things, Joe, and that's space and pace. And if you've no cover and no defensive template in place, then your defenders are in for a long, hard day.
Yeah, certainly going to be difficult for them. Daniel, we'll move on to Leinster and Munster. Not a great deal of analysis here. We'll have a look at Leinster first. Dublin with 5 goals in the first half there against Kildare. Absolutely ruthless performance. I think that they conceded 4 goals in the first 18 minutes. Now, if we thought the Roscommon defending was bad, the Kildare defending there was absolutely shocking. It was so easy for Dublin. What on earth were Kildare thinking there?
I don't know. I really and truly don't know. I watched it again this evening, and each of the goals just were under 10 things. Like it was so poor, and I can't get my head around the mentality of Kildare. Like what they thought was going to happen. Like, I mean, I was looking at a certain little patterns, and you had some lads were standing man to man with their marker who was standing out in the wing, and they were standing there looking them in the face as runners were going past them. There was other lads who were trying to play zonal. It just looked like they were devoid of any kind of plan whatsoever. And there's probably warning signs in the league were there as well. And obviously Dublin were a little bit angry from Newbridge. You know, I was talking to our boys last night. They come up for training and they don't give much away, but they were just saying that they expected a massive battle in the first 15, 20 minutes. And it never showed up. And I don't, like, we were talking about kind of, you hear the phrases like, you know, go and have a go and bravery and go and win the game. Like, bravery isn't leaving poor Mick O'Grady in the full backline and Connacht in 50 metres of space. That's not bravery. That's ridiculousness. Like, I mean, the poor man, you want to go in and give him a hug after 20 minutes. Like, it was unbelievable. Like, it really was. And it was almost like they just said, right, we'll give this a go for 15 minutes. And then if they score a load of goals, well, sure, look, we've tried, we've gone out and played. Because last year they sat back and were criticised for that. This year they went out and left themselves totally exposed. And then they start playing then when they're 20 points down nearly. And I can't get the Kildare mentality. I really can't. And unfortunately, it's pretty much same old from them. Like, and again, I still don't know about Dublin because, like, you've played, you know, you haven't really played much as of yet. And Kildare were back to Division 3 style Kildare. There was, you know, their shooting was wild. There was no intensity whatsoever. Like, after they conceded the 4th goal, they started dropping numbers back. But it wasn't planned. It wasn't organised. I mean, I've no problem with dropping numbers back when you're on scramble defence, when it's a turnover ball. You get yourself set inside the 45, and then you squeeze your line out and you start to get contact maybe 10 or 15 metres outside the 45. But if you let Kieran Kilkenny and Brian Fenton get their head up and look inside, they'll pick off sweepers with passes. Like, you know, so you can't just totally sit off. There has to be a little balance, and that there seemed to be, you know. Derry were, let's say, again, we'll go back to them for a second, but they were completely the opposite. They had a plan, they stuck rigidly to it. Kildare looked like they had a plan of man-to-man is all they could see. And then after 15 minutes, they were like, oh no, don't believe in this plan. We're back into sitting in. And even for the Dublin kickers, I saw a couple of them behind the goal. Dublin come into a spine, and all the Kildare lads followed them in. And then Evan Comfort could hit it with his right leg into space, 60 yards, and no one would be near him. And all that has to happen is one runner has to break. And it's unbelievably frustrating. And you really have to wonder, like, I was looking at those players individually. Those players individually are as good as what Derry has. But what does Derry have? They have unbelievably good coaching. And from what I can see, Kildare don't. And that's the long and the short of it, I think.
Stevie, at the end of the game there, Glenn Rand said that it went drastically wrong for Kildare, but sure, they knew they were playing Dublin, you know, for the last couple of weeks. Surely in training, they're going to set up some kind of defensive structure or defensive system against Dublin, like against these players that Dublin have. It wasn't the case.
You see, Joe, it goes back to what Daniel talked about earlier as well, the narrative, you know, the narrative that, you know, people are afraid of what people are going to say about them, you know, and this Kildare management team have been, labelled the dream team or whatever, and it's, you're looking at their National League performances, and people have been lauding some of their performances in the National League, but playing in the depths of the winter in Newbridge in front of a partisan crowd on a tight field is completely different to playing in Croke Park, against Dublin, who are in prime time physical condition, and that the warning signs, Joe, for Kildare were they got to see Dublin playing, against Wexford. They got to see them playing against Meath. The warning signs were there that the Dubs had their mojo back. They really, really did have their spark back. They had their mojo back. And, the organisation of Dublin, the way they're leaving the three in deep, on Sunday, it was Con, Rock and Costello, lying in deep as a three, nearly like a nut. The old John Morrison one, Lord rest him, where he used to leave three inside and then breaking out in different areas and using screening and the likes of that, and you can see Dublin are obviously, trying to give as much depth to their attack as possible and give them that kicking option, Joe. But my God, in the first half, or the first 20 minutes, it was, Joe, there's nothing short of comical to describe the performance, because it was comical. I seen a tweet, I can't remember who it was, but someone says, like, why are the Kildare management team not getting questioned on going out and going man-to-man against Dublin for the first 20 minutes, and it is absolute madness. Like, when you look at the form that Con O'Callaghan has come back in, like that break that Con O'Callaghan has had, that break will do him the world of good, Joe. He's back like a new man now. He just looks, you touched on it last time, Daniel, we were speaking. He is frightening, absolutely frightening. Physical condition, the pace, the power. It's just awesome, and then the running power off the shoulder of, the likes of Kilkenny coming from deep and Bulger and these guys. Like, it's absolutely phenomenal to watch, but it's phenomenal to watch when they're allowed to play, Joe, and when you let a team play, and you can bet your bottom dollar Dublin will meet Kerry in the All-Ireland semi-final. That is the All-Ireland semi-final. Okay, there's no one's going to beat Dublin or Kerry in the quarter-final. I can't see it, right? I can't see it. I'll be astonished if they do. So in that All-Ireland semi-final, we can guarantee 100%, regardless of what the purists think, Kerry will be setting up with 15 men behind the ball for the first 15, 20 minutes. They will have everyone back. And that first 20 minutes in Croke Park, 3-2, 4 each, 5 each, whatever. And tell you this now, they'll not be conceding 3 or 4 goals. Not a chance.
And Kerry there, Daniel, not much analysis in this one, the Munster final. Dismantled Limerick 128-0. David Clifford was out injured. I was going to ask you, how good are Dublin and Kerry? Is there anything that you can glean from these games that can say to you, okay, that's the team that's going to win the All-Ireland?
No, really, to be honest. I will say both teams look hungry. Both teams look sharp, but most teams do when there's no pressure, when there's no major opposition, unfortunately. So it's very hard to tell. The quarter-final stages might be interesting to see who gets more of a contest and what that draw might be ahead of a semi-final. As Stevie says, they're more than likely going to meet in the semi-final. So that will be interesting to see if the lack of games will eventually catch up on either of them. But it's the whole provincial thing has just left me, like, probably outside of Ulster, in fairness, which at least was competitive. Whatever else it may not have been, the whole thing has just left me feeling really flat and pointless. And even in the comparison with some of the excitement in the Tailteann Cup, and I never thought I'd see myself saying it, but at least that seems more meaningful. Like, and that's an awful indictment of the provincials, but it's even from an analysis point of view, you're learning zero practically. You're learning nothing. I mean, we know Dublin can score goals. We know Kerry can ream off 30 points. Now, I think on the Sunday game they were looking for something that Kerry didn't score enough goals. But sure, look, I mean, it's a tiny little nitpicking point to do a piece of analysis. They scored 28 points. It's I don't know. It's largely pointless, and it's nearly unfair on Limerick, and I won't say unfair in Kildare, because Kildare are a Division 1. I know they're Division 2 now. They should be putting up a little bit of a burst, but, like, in fairness to Limerick, it was bonus territory for them, and they've had a phenomenal year, so I wouldn't be too hard on them. But it's the whole weekend left me a little bit flat, to be honest with you.
Lads, I'd like to get your view on the back door for the All-Ireland. We have a couple of big games coming up the weekend. Stevie, we've got Monaghan v Mayo, we've got Tyrone v Armagh. Who do you see making a burst there through the back door?
Well, I think this weekend's games, Joe, the two big ones, obviously Mayo and Monaghan. I was actually at the game in the National League this year in Clones. There was very little between the teams. I think the same will happen this weekend again. It was very, very interesting. Tactically, what Mayo done that day to the Monaghan goalkeeper, Began, they actually man-marked him in the second half to curb his influence and actually everybody pushed up a line. Everybody pushed up one. And it'd be very interesting to see how Mayo approach that this weekend. Monaghan will have learned hard lessons from the Derry game as well. So you can expect Monaghan to be a bit more rigid defensively, a bit more solid defensively. And Mayo have always historically struggled against teams like that. Now they did get the win in Clones this year, but Monaghan were the better side that day, to be honest with you, Joe. So I can see that game very, very 50-50-ish. I just think with the injury list that Mayo have, the rumour mill is that Ryan O'Donoghue's injured. If he's injured, I think they're in big trouble. Coupled with the injuries they already have. So I'm going to predict Monaghan in that. And I think that Sunday's game in the Athletic Grounds is going to be a classic. I think it's going to be seriously intense. It's knockout football. It's probably the first proper knockout game that we're going to see this year, Joe. So it'll be very interesting to see. And I'm just going to probably edge for home advantage in Armagh in this one.
Daniel, who do you see coming through that back door group?
They're controversial choices for myself, but the phrase he used there was knockout, and I'm just thinking about who are knockout teams, and obviously up to All-Ireland finals, Mayo are knockout kings, and when the pressure is on, they find a way, and they're very comfortable under that route, under qualifier route, under pressure route. I still have an inkling for Mayo, I think. I think they'll have used their time quite well. It's kind of a period, like they've had a substantial amount of time since the Galway game, and I just have a sneaky suspicion that they'll come back all guns blazing, and it'll be, I think, their conditioning and their power, and they're probably, even despite the couple of injuries, their bench might get them over the line, I think. Whereas I think Monaghan are slightly more limited in that aspect. But so I give Mayo the nod there. And then I suppose when you're looking at Armagh Tyrone, again, who are comfortable coming through qualifiers, who are comfortable in crunch knockout games, that's Tyrone all day for me. And I think Armagh have a little bit of the Kildares about them still. I think they emptied the tank in the league, and I'm not sure if they're going to have the variety in their play to cope with Tyrone. I think Tyrone are going to go back to brass tacks. I think they're going to go back like they did last year. They're going to go back to a heavy counter-attacking game. I think they'll run hard through the Armagh lines, and I can really see them bringing a massive edge to this. It's funny, like if I was talking to Stevie way back when and we were talking about how dangerous the qualifiers could be, and I said, Jesus, Armagh Tyrone, that'd be the exact one that would get the Tyrone people absolutely humming, and I think I fancy Tyrone, but I still think I think Armagh have a bit to go still. I think Tyrone could be a little bit more comfortable than we think.
Certainly two home dingers there for the weekend for us to look forward to. Lads, we'll move on to the Tailteann Cup. There were 7 games. We'll probably spend maybe 30 seconds to a minute on each game. Stevie, I'll start with you. One of the first games that was played was Cavan against Down, 24-112. No surprise there, Stevie. In fact, I was watching it myself. I thought maybe Cavan could have scored 30 points in that game. Down got an early goal, but it wasn't to be. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, Joe, look, it's been a tough year for James, tough year for Down. I think the best thing to do, Joe, after the weekend is to put a line through this year and start looking at next year and start looking to rebuild and maybe possibly go bring in some younger players from the under-20s last year. Go with youth, try and build from the bottom up, but certainly a very disappointing calendar year. Not to win a game all year, Joe, is very, very disappointing.
It certainly is. Daniel, Leitrim beat Antrim. Keith Byrne get 0-6. He's their main man. That was a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, I was watching the highlights of it, and it was, and Antrim looked a little bit all over the place, and even discipline-wise, they didn't look hectic, and even Enda McGinley leaving after the game. I'm kind of wondering, was everything okay in the camp? It didn't look like the performance I would have expected from Antrim, but Leitrim will be delighted with it. That's a really, really big win for them, and they'll fancy the next round as well, so it's it was relatively competitive, but I think Leitrim were probably a bit more comfortable than the scoreline suggested in the end.
Yeah, they certainly seemed a wee bit more clinical in front of goals. Stevie, are you surprised Enda McGinley has stepped down after 2 years?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, Joe. As Daniel says, it's hard to know what was going on in the camp. I know his brother-in-law to the McCanns, and the rumour mill was that the McCanns were sort of retiring this year as well. They'd given 2 years, and maybe that was sort of the pre-contract agreement, Joe, that he would do 2 years, maybe, you know. But I know Enda's a very good coach, and I'm sure that he'll get another job if he wants to stay in coaching. There's no question about it that he's got a bright future in coaching ahead of him.
He certainly will. One here for me, lads, and I'm disappointed with this one, obviously. Sligo 3-15, London 2-16. That game went to extra time. It was a roller coaster of a game. I'm still feeling the effects of it here myself. Alan Riley broke our hearts there, lads, with a point at the end of normal time. And then they got a goal at the end of extra time as well. We missed a penalty. We also missed a free kick to win it at the end of normal time. So we got a couple of black cards as well and a couple of red cards too. But fair play to Sligo, I suppose, for coming back there and sticking with it, Daniel.
Yeah, it was, again, only saw the highlights, but it looked like a bit of a humdinger, and it was a pity. I heard that you have to get a number of flights, and there was a lot of logistical bits and pieces. So all those things considered, I thought a phenomenal performance from London. And it's obviously, I know Tony McEntee was looking fairly seriously at it post championship knockout. He was saying they're going to take this quite seriously, but it would have been a massive win for London. Really would have. An extra game, an extra week in the championship would have been brilliant, and it's the kind of competition that could bring London on leaps and bounds, I thought. But a pity in the end. I'd say it's a devastating way to lose.
Yeah, well, London had a good season. They had 3 wins in the league. They brought Leitrim to the end as well, and they probably should have beat Sligo there. So fair play to London.
I was just going to say that, Joe. Actually, fair play to you. You had a fantastic year, because I know from speaking to yourself and Kieran that logistically it's very difficult for you, even with training and stuff like that. So hats off and well done. That was a brilliant year for you. Well done.
Thanks very much, lads. And lads, team obviously close to your hearts. Carlo beat Tipperary there, Daniel. Superb win. I think it was a second half performance that got you through.
Yeah, I managed to grab an old link from an old contact, so I got to watch it fully today. So it was brilliant. Yeah, it really was. They were they went back to what they were good at, really. They kind of realized probably physically Tipperary would have been a bit bigger, but they got a lot of mobility in around the middle third of the field. They dropped off most kickouts. They filled their half of the field fairly well, and they kept the ball for periods of possession. And a club mate of mine, is kind of his first proper year inside, got a really good goal that kind of steadied the ship a little bit. Niall Hickey, he got a really good finish, but it was it's brilliant, and again, I think this is exactly what the competition is about. Like, there were some fantastic young footballers playing who probably haven't got exposed to real championship stuff with Carlo yet. There was a really good buzz about it afterwards, so it's they'll be really happy with it, I think, and I hope that this momentum continues on to next year, and they stick with these young lads that they have, because they have a panel of really good, honest, hard-working lads, and I hope that kind of continues to next year, and they have a little bit of consistency now, which is really important. But Westmeath will be a tough one for them, and Carlo struggled a little bit on their own kick out when they didn't get it away short. So if they can remedy those couple of small little things, they should be competitive anyway.
Dara Foley there, your old mate that you soldiered with, I think it was his flick down for the Foley goal there. It was a great picture of him at the end of the game celebrating it. Good to see that for those senior lads, isn't it?
It's brilliant, yeah, it is, because it's been tough. Definitely, I've been in contact with Dara fairly regularly, and it's not been easy. And look, when you have a transition of maybe 15, 20 players, it's a massive change, and he puts his life and soul into it. I know from the way he carries himself and how he trains, it means the world to him. And I was delighted for him as well, that he's getting a little bit of kudos as well, because he was always a little bit of the forgotten man sometimes, and I'm delighted to see him going well. And that picture at the end, he was just telling me he'd ordered his little chipper at home. He said he got a nice little burger afterwards. He said he was allowed a treat, so he said he'd throw the hands up in the air. I hope he doesn't listen to this now. He'll hit me back with something.
I'm going to send it to him.
And Westmeath, I think Carlo played Westmeath. They beat Laois 113 to 013. Stevie, not a great season for Laois there. I think Sam McCartan got the goal there for Westmeath, I think it was.
Yeah, don't get me started in Laois, Joe. Like, you're trying to set me up there to get me going. Like, oh, listen here. Look, no, difficult season for Billy, first year in charge, and a bit like Carlo, big turnover of players there too. See John O'Loughlin retired there today. Colin Begley during the week, losing some big players, and that's a rebuilding job for Billy as well, Joe,
And Offaly, not 18, Daniel Wicklow, not 10, McNamee's there, now McNamee. John Mahan and Tomas O'Shea will be happy with that performance, I would say.
Yeah, and I actually found John Mahan's comments interesting afterwards, that he said it's a good chance for them to blood under 20s, so they're not necessarily looking at it as their senior competition. Obviously, they're a phenomenal under 20 side, and that could be very beneficial for them next year, that they're getting 2 or 3 competitive games into those young lads, because that is the future of Offaly football realistically. So I think it's very interesting the way different managers are approaching this. Cavan pretty much going full board. Let's say Carlo will be going full board, and then Offaly using it as a slightly different kind of adventure. So it definitely is interesting. But still, at the same time, Offaly kind of steadied the ship after the Wexford game. I think things have calmed down a little bit, and they seem to be playing really nice football. So they'll definitely be thereabouts in the check up at the end.
And last game in the Tailteann Cup there, Stevie, was Longford 0-12, Fermanagh 1-12. Great result there for Kieran Donnelly. We sort of seen things from Fermanagh in the first half performance against Tyrone. Good result.
Yeah, great result. And, again, they have a big game now, Joe, against Cavan. And if they're to beat Cavan now, it would set them up lovely. I think if Fermanagh were to beat Cavan in the next round, it would probably actually put them in as favourites and to win the Tailteann Cup, in my opinion, But again, the next one is the big one for them.
And Cavan are 11-8, Daniel, to win the Tailteann Cup at the minute with Paddy Power. Offaly 10-3, next favourites. Do you look beyond those two teams? Are Westmeath in for a chance for Fermanagh, as Stevie said?
Yeah, quite possibly. And again, this all depends on the attitude coming into it. It's very hard to read the form lines. And as I said, with Offaly, they could be looking at it as a slightly different thing, whereas Cavan could be going all out for it. And you still would have to say Cavan, just purely based on the quality of player they have, and they have such strength, like especially down their spine. Their team is phenomenal, So you probably would be leaning towards Cavan, I would imagine. But then again, like Fermanagh wouldn't fear Cavan if they met them, that they won't fear them, and I'd say that'll be probably go a long way to deciding who wins it, I'd imagine.
Excellent stuff, lads. Thanks very much, Stevie and Daniel, for joining the podcast.
Thanks,
no problem. Thank you, lads.
And thank you very much for tuning in. And hopefully we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.